And welcome back, everybody, to our second session of our early career days. And I'm really excited for this one. We're about to interview Atanas Pekanov, a longstanding YSI member and dear friend who happened to be, over the last year, Deputy Prime Minister of Bulgaria in the transitional government, to which he was appointed by President Rumen Radev, who he had been advising since 2018. And of course, in his day job before that, in his position prior, he was an economist at the Austrian Institute of Economic Research, WIFO, where he was doing his PhD on distributional questions and monetary policy. He's got many other things on his bio already in his young years. He was a Fulbright scholar at Harvard. He had positions at the ECB, and he worked directly with me at INET for the YSI plenary 2016. So welcome, Atanas. It's a real great pleasure to have you here today and to talk about your experience in working in the transitional government. How are you?
Hi, Jay. Hello, everybody. Thanks a lot for the invitation. Thanks a lot for organizing this event. I think it's an important event for the YSI community. And I'm very happy to be here and talk about the last year, which was quite turbulent for me, very interesting year where I learned a lot. And I hope I can also share some of the insights that I got from being in this position.
Amazing. Let's get right into it, Atanas. Many of us don't know the exact backstory of both the political landscape and why a transitional government had to be put in place in the first place, which is a technocratic government that was not elected. So maybe you should speak to that. And as you're speaking about this, I would like to sort of maybe ask you to also speak about the actual decision of the president to approach you to take over the decision. Was it a hard decision for you? How was that decision made? What did you consider? Maybe we can get into these questions first.
Okay, thank you. So let me start there. It was around exactly 1 year ago, in April of last year, there was a regular election in Bulgaria. However, after the election, the political parties couldn't find a consensus coalition to build. So the Bulgarian law stipulates that after 3 attempts by 3 political parties to form a government, there should be a new election. So basically, a month after an election, if a government is not formed, there should be a new election. And in the meantime, until a new government is sworn in, caretaker cabinet has to take over. And this is the prerogative of the president of the country to appoint it. As you rightly pointed out, I have been advising the president on different issues, mostly macroeconomics, mostly European questions. I'm very interested, and I've been following a lot questions on the future of the euro area, on the fiscal rules in the euro area, on whether Bulgaria should join the euro. It was a topic that I was pretty active on in recent years, also in public debates back home. So when the situation arose last year, he invited me to take the role of Deputy Prime Minister for EU funds management. Basically, this is the role of Deputy Prime Minister that oversees all the ministries that are receiving EU funds. And Bulgaria, as a new EU member state and an Eastern European member state, receives it's a large beneficiary of the EU funds. So this is a very important position that has, I would say, responsibilities in many sectors. And on top of that, this position now also included overseeing the recovery and resilience plan of the country, on which I can tell a bit more after that. So last year, I would say at the end of April, I was approached by the president and invited. Let's say it like this. The caretaker cabinet in Bulgaria is an institution that there is very often a caretaker cabinet. So either when the coalition breaks down or after an election has not led to the formation of a new coalition. And normally it's in place only for around 2 months, 2.5 months. Because in the next 2 months, after the regular elections have not produced any feasible solution for governance, there should be new election. So our expectation and going in the caretaker cabinet was that it had the time horizon of 2 to 3 months. However, in the summer, the same thing repeated again. So there was another election in July, and there was a political deadlock where the political parties again didn't find a consensus and again didn't find a way to form a coalition. It was a very split parliament with 6 or 7 parties. So in August, again, they didn't find a solution. So there needed to be another election in November, which meant that the caretaker government got prolonged. So overall, I served for seven months. This is by far the longest caretaker transition cabinet that we had. It was always devised to serve as a bridge government made of experts, technocrats, in a sense that have to be objective, have to be neutral, and have to lead the country and preserve stability while a new regular cabinet is sworn in. And on your question on the decision, well, I would say that I didn't doubt much my decision. I think I've been pretty lucky in my career so far to be able to learn a lot, to visit many places. I've been in Vienna now for 10 years, but in the meantime, I've also been to Harvard, in London, in Frankfurt, in New York for a while. And Eastern European countries, for a lot of us of our generation, this is how the career proceeds. Normally you go for education abroad and you stay a couple of years. And I think for many of us, it's important then to come back and to try to contribute to better policies, to better governance. So as I was invited, although I knew there will be so much challenges and so much tasks, my country is facing a lot of challenges that have accumulated throughout the years and a lot of problems, but I never doubted that this is the right thing to do. Yeah.
Well, this is a fascinating story so far. So let's get into the actual role a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about first the responsibilities as they're sort of spelled out. What were the main things you had to work on? But I'm also interested in very practical things. What was it like to come on board? What are some of the onboarding experiences? How much staff did you have? Who are you reporting to? What is sort of the picture you can tell us as you're coming in from an academic position to a high-level government job? I'm sure that is a great transition to make.
So so there are 2 main responsibilities in this position. It's overseeing and programming of EU funds, meaning that one has direct everyday communication with the ministries and also plans how the different EU funding should be spent, and also monitors if it's spent properly. But this time around, and in this situation, there was the additional very huge task, I would say, of finalizing the Bulgarian Recovery and Resilience Plan. So the Bulgarian Recovery and Resilience Plan is part of the EU-wide response to the pandemic. It's part of the Next Generation EU instrument, which is a huge new instrument of the European Union to stimulate the economies of the EU after the corona pandemic, but also to invest in long-term investments, mostly in the green transition and in the digital transition. So as I came into office last year on the 12th of May, Bulgaria has not yet submitted its National Recovery and Resilience Plan to Brussels and was facing a number of challenges, mostly because I would say in the area of energy and in the area of the green transition. Something that I would say we haven't made enough progress in recent years, where also the debate in society was lacking. The Green Deal was often seen as a challenge, as something that will be a risk, but was not presented as an opportunity to renew our economies, to make them more sustainable, and also to create better jobs, I would say. New jobs, better jobs. And as I took over this job, I had to really focus on this to finalize and submit the Bulgarian Recovery and Resilience Plan. It was, in the end, it is a huge program basically for governance of the country in the coming years. It consists of 56 investment projects that need to be realized in the next 6 years, and 48 reforms that need to be implemented or need to be taken by Parliament in the coming years. So this was the major task. Of course, this meant, and there I come to the next question, this meant expertise in many different areas, from energy sector to transport to healthcare, education, and one cannot have the expertise in all of these areas. I'm coming from a background of being a macroeconomist and also an economist in, I would say, public policy, EU policy. So this is why it is so important to have good experts. And for me, I brought some young people that had similar backgrounds as me. They have been educated abroad. They have had good chances to develop in recent years. And I thought this would be something that would also bring a bit of fresh air to the civil service, which is in your, of course, one can use it. The minister or the deputy prime minister or the prime minister uses the civil service, but also brings the political cabinet. The political cabinet are your closest advisors that really help you make the decisions where, for example, different experts disagree or give you different viewpoints on certain matters. And of course, at the beginning, this was a huge challenge, as I've been living abroad for a very long time, and I was an outsider to the system. I was mostly in academic circles before that, and at the beginning, this was a huge task. But I think by finding the right people that could guide me and could help me along this way, this was actually what helped me so much to be able to do the job along the way.
Well, I think one thing that was fascinating for me personally and for the entire YSI community, many of your friends and colleagues from all these years that you being a part of so many different types of communities, including YSI, you've built up a huge social media presence in order to communicate with your constituents, and which we were, of course, beneficiaries of as well. Claire is now posting the for all of us to go through that a little bit here on Twitter, your Twitter profile. I might say really well done. I think it was really well communicated. I'm just wondering what kind of vision or style of communication were you trying to bring forward in this use of social media, and how does that differ from previous governments or what happened in Bulgaria? How was that taken up?
So this is a very good question. This was also a thing that I had to adjust myself to. Somebody coming from an academic background, I was used to having these very long communications, papers, where we refer to different things or developments or processes or empirics. And in a government position, you have to be aware that citizens don't have infinite time to read and get all the information on a certain topic. You have to explain to them what is the problem at hand, what are the solutions, and I think we really tried to do that, especially in areas where the debate was difficult, where previous governments or politicians have tried to avoid the debate. It is always very often to give the blame on somebody else, and I think in many Eastern European countries this happens often, giving the blame to Brussels and saying, well, this is something that was decided there. It's bad for us, but it's decided by somebody else, and we can blame them. And I was always trying to be more constructive in this by explaining, okay, why are we taking these steps? For example, why do we have many people were unsure whether we should invest a big part of the National Recovery and Resilience Plan into the green, for example, in renewable energy. However, these are priorities that I think are shared by European Union member states. And for me, it was important to show how, okay, this might seem challenging, might seem something new, but it's also a possibility to get our economy in a better shape, to get better paying jobs, which is something that has been lacking in Bulgaria. For it was not at the pace of convergence of income was not I would say was not enough in recent years. So for me, it was very important to actively communicate this. Okay, these are the issues. We might have one view here in Bulgaria, but we should understand what is the overall picture and where we can fit in them. If we don't agree with what has been already proposed, we should, of course, try to get the best possibility for our country. That's something that is not so easy, but one has to do.
Let me just pick up on one point you just made. So the difference of pace and decision making in particular. I've recently saw an interview that you've given many interviews throughout your tenure, so it's really nice to follow. But I think the Austrians in particular have been very keen and interested in having you on, so which is beneficial for me since I also speak German. But there you were saying something very interesting, which I think I like to come into as well, thinking about decisions and decision making. And you said something very, very particular, which was, well, it's important to gather all the facts and get all the expert opinions, and it's actually sometimes frustrating for you as a politician to have to make decisions, forced decisions now, and not have to wait. You cannot get all the facts on the ground and all the opinions and expertise lined up for you to make that proper decision. So how is that tension specifically for you? Can you give us some examples where things got difficult, and at what pace? How do decisions actually get made when you're making decisions? How is this consensus being built here?
This is really one of the things that I learned as one of the most challenging things in politics nowadays. And I don't think this is only true in Bulgaria. I think this is true everywhere. Decisions are made on a daily basis, on a very fast basis. Basically, some problem arises and both citizens and media and stakeholders, they expect to have a solution very fast. So they want a response and they want to know what you're going to do. And of course, for me, this was a challenge because I'm used to our, let's be fair, very slow academic debates where it takes months or years to reach, I would say, a consensus opinion and say, okay, this is the right thing to do. And sometimes that would mean that in reality, it's very hard to implement the optimal policy response. But the pace is important. People really expect their politicians to be dynamic, to really be able to address the challenges that arise. And it's difficult because you don't have to get very deep in the questions. This is challenging. This might be problematic. This might hide risks, but this is the reality, and one has to get used to it when one is inside of the system.
Let me ask you another question, which is maybe particular to this transitional nature of the government and the caretaker government. To what degree did you have to work with other branches of government and with the parliament and other sort of actual parties that have been elected that might try to take influence over your work and the agenda you're trying to follow?
This was one of the decisively difficult things. Basically, for most of the time, Parliament was not there because it was election period. So for around 4 of the 7 months that we were in power, there was no Parliament. So basically, we can only govern without changing the laws. Okay, and that means that many important reforms that needed to be implemented as soon as possible couldn't get implemented right away because they sometimes needed some changes that need to go through Parliament. This also meant, however, an additional challenge that is connected to the National Recovery and Resilience Plan. The National Recovery and Resilience Plan sets a lot of long-term strategies for different sectors. And of course, it's not always easy for a technocratic government to set such directions or make difficult political choices, since, first of all, in a way, we are not fully democratically legitimate. And then secondly, is it really the task of a short-term government to decide on things that will happen, let's say, in 5 years or 10 years. But as time passes by, decisions have to be made. You cannot prolong them. You cannot leave them for next month. You cannot leave them for next week sometimes. So they have to be taken. And this was the responsibility that we took. And I'm quite happy that we did that, because otherwise the country would have lost very significant time if no decisions were made in the meantime.
That's very interesting. So let me just ask you a question that often I think in the political realm is in there. I think we say that about do you make the position or does the position make you? And that's maybe a question about how much do you think your vision and your values, your person, all these things you've acquired in your education and your being, how much were you able to transport into this position, and why, if that's the case? Or did the position sort of shape you in a way back that you didn't expect, or that we might want to learn about as well?
This is an interesting question. It's both ways, and it's true that one thinks, I think, before ex ante, before taking the position, okay, now I'm going to be able to implement all my ideas, all the things that I think are correct and right, and I have learned through my studies that the right approach. Yet, however, you have to be aware that you have to keep attention on the relevant stakeholders. You have to keep. That doesn't mean you have to always adjust your decisions to them. Very good example of this was, as I said, the green transition, the Green Deal, something that is seen sometimes as a danger. And I had a lot of discussions, sometimes weekly or even daily discussions with the trade unions. And for many years, I've been in many economic policy debates on their side, on minimum wages, on different measures for social safety, on different collective bargaining agreements. I've been in the same opinion with them on many occasions. However, on this we were on different opinions. So they were sometimes skeptical, sometimes not sure whether this will be good for the workers, and especially, of course, there is a huge coal industry in Bulgaria. However, the reality is that it's very polluting. So we had to find some decision. And I would say, for example, of the highlights of my time in government was, and it's a strange thing to say, but was one big protest that there was, let's say, against the closing of coal plants in the country. And I went to the protest to talk with the people that came. It was mainly miners from the region, from the coal region in Bulgaria. And I wanted to hear their opinion. And I heard their worries that they will lose their jobs, they will lose their income. And then I invited them to the Council of Ministers. We had a long discussion how we can negotiate with Brussels a decision that will be, let's say, somewhere in the middle, that we still do significant investment in the green transition, that we go more and more into renewables, for example, but that we also make enough investment to guarantee the jobs of the people in this region, which was always something that was for me important. So this is an example of something that, for me, as I said, I share the priorities of the green transition, but I also share the concerns of citizens in terms of the social impact that different transitions, the different transformations of our economy can have on them. And we have to listen to them. And without listening to them, we're not going to be taking the right decision. Even if we on our own are quite sure, okay, in the long term, this will bring us some benefits.
So let's take a quick look at what do you think, two things. One is maybe I encourage all of you who have not done so, just go through the Twitter feed. I would like to just talk about some of the big highlights, because in these 7 months you've actually visited many or visited with very important figures that we all know. And what sort of stood out? Could you speak about maybe the sequence of events, maybe the 3 or 4 biggest meetings you've had that you had to prepare?
That's a great question. I would start by saying, so the first couple of weeks, I was actually relatively shy. I wanted to see the environment back home in Bulgaria, because I would say that, as I said, I had the opportunity in recent years to be at many places, to get, I think, a good start in my professional underpinnings. But back home, I haven't been so active. So I wanted to hear what the local stakeholders have to say, what the local trade unions have to say, what the local business organizations have to say. However, as soon as I was already prepared and I knew what their opinion on different issues were, I was, I believe, quite ready to get involved also in the European scene, but also in a more international scene. For me, the biggest highlight was that I was presenting the country at the yearly OECD ministerial meetings. And I have to say, this is yet one other thing that I'm so thankful to YSI, because YSI is the organization that first brought me to the OECD. At 2015, when there was the YSI plenary there, I remember it was during the Greek crisis, and we had amazing
conference called, was it Égalité?
Égalité, liberté, fraternité.
Liberté, Égalité, Fragilité was the conference title, the INEC conference title. And YSI had its meeting there too, of course. That's where we saw each other.
So this was an amazing conference back then. And I remember back then why it was so nice to be part of the YSI community. Because we were always, yes, involved and interested in, let's say, economic research, public policy, but mostly how to make it relevant. How to make it relevant for citizens, how to make it relevant for contributing to real world problems. And even today I'm teaching at the university, and I'm always trying to also show this to the students that I'm teaching. I'm teaching a bachelor course in monetary economics and economic policy. And I learned from Perry Merling to start always with the first page of the Financial Times. This is what is it, the relevance to what we are discussing has to be relevant for the world. And I remember 2015 when we were at the OECD meeting. It was in the middle of the Greek crisis, and now last year when I went, it was so interesting to be on the side of representing my country. It was a huge responsibility, but I was very happy to be there. Bulgaria has been trying to negotiate to start accession talks to the OECD. And I had a number of very, I hope, successful meetings, because now in January we also got the invitation to start the talks. I had a short talk with Mr. John Kerry. I had a meeting with Mr. Valdis Dombrovskis, the Vice President of the European Commission. I had a meeting with Minister Clement Beaune. This is the European Minister of France. We had many further meetings where for me, it was important to show, well, Bulgaria is now open to the world. Bulgaria wants to be part of the global debate, and it could be part of the global debate because of the young people that had the opportunities, similarly to me, to be part of this debate in other fora, in other developments in their career. So this was pretty important for me. And then secondly, of course, as somebody who is in charge of EU funds, going to Brussels was a main highlight, because this is where you basically negotiate the position of your country. It was a very interesting experience to be part of the Council, the Council for Cohesion Policy, where we discussed the future of cohesion policy, in what direction, for example, cohesion policy and EU funds are helping but can be improved, for example. How can we more efficiently use them to ensure convergence in the euro area, to ensure that the income and standard of living of newer member states is converging faster to the old member states, and many other issues. And for me, as I said, this was extremely important and essential to show that we are on board, we are at the table, and we are discussing the things that will basically influence and determine the future of our country and our economy. And then finally, as I said, I think it's an interesting highlight. It was not an international highlight, but for me, a very major highlight was the big miners' strike. The big miners' strike was, I was very unsure how to approach it, because, as I said, in many occasions throughout the years, I have sided with the trade unions and thought that they are right. On this occasion, we had different opinions, but as I said, through many discussions, some of them difficult, some of them very long negotiations going for hours, we found a solution that at the end was agreeable for both sides. And I think when I also spoke at the strike, I spoke with some people that came from the region, that are just workers at the mine there, and I think they understood that we are trying the same thing. We're trying to find the best solution, and this might sometimes have different. You can see it from different angles, but at the end, we managed to find something and to agree upon.
So now that we look at the totality of these 7 months, it must have been a whirlpool of experiences. So you've now been going back into the academy. And so first of all, it's before we get into what happens now and how we actually reflect on this experience for your life and what we can learn from that as a community. So what do you think your impact was? I think you're giving a positive sort of summary, a positive sort of thing for the country. What did you regret, or what would have you done differently in hindsight? Would you've been if you go for a second round, would you be less shy at the beginning? Are there decisions that you would redo in a different way, or is there another way to do the decisions? Because only by doing them can you actually find out if they work or not. So just wanted to see, what is the impact you think you've had? Do you think your government and your own contribution has been impactful enough? Are you walking away with this satisfied?
I'm walking away from this very satisfied. It's been extremely. I have been extremely happy to see that in the recent 2-3 months since the government has switched to a regular government at the end of December. Many people on the street stop me and tell me things that they like that I did, and some things also that they didn't like maybe, but it's mostly things that they like. But what really mattered for me is that they really heard what are the issues. They really understood, okay, on this thing, we're actually not doing so good. And politicians can very easily get to tell you some big promises and promise you we'll address this tomorrow, and this challenge will be gone tomorrow. But that's often not the case. Public policy and institution building is a very, very slow process. We have to start it, and we should not over promise that it will happen by overnight. It takes time, it takes expertise, it takes a lot of people, it takes courage, it takes the willingness to act in one direction that is taken and to act persistently. And I think I was able to signal this, and this is, I think, a main challenge that sometimes public opinion is that, well, the issues that we have, the challenges that we have, they're easy. We can, if we only had the proper government, this will be, things will get really great overnight. This is often not the case. When for many years, many problems have gathered, it takes time. And I'm pretty confident that I tried, and I think I was quite successful to explain what are the issues. And only after understanding the issues, we can actually find the right policy solutions to them. So on this, I'm quite happy. I would say one thing that people criticize me about, and I think it's maybe true, maybe not, that going too academic, using all of our background that we have gathered through conferences, through discussions. Yet, however, as I said, for ordinary citizens, these long discussions, they don't have so much a meaning. The meaning is, how is my life affected? How can my income be, for example, under risk? What can be the possibilities of this or that program? So one has to be very clear and see and be very focused on how we can show that these things, for example, a lot of the things that I was working on, large EU funding programs, they sound very technocratic. And improving them or embedding them in some way seems like some technocratic dream. But it's not a technocratic dream. It's actually a political prerequisite for ensuring the prosperity of the country, for ensuring the safety of people's livelihoods, of the future of the regions, and ensuring a fair transition, for example, to a better economy, to a more productive economy and a more productive society, I would say.
And maybe can I get you to reflect on one other theme that we care a lot about in INET and YSI is the intertwinedness, the interconnectedness of politics with economics. And I think you've now coming into an administration that is, of course, technocratic, but you're still operating in a landscape that has been shaped by decades of, a certain practice. And you said you're an outsider. So what did you learn about how things worked within Bulgaria, within the institutions, with how these funds have been used in the past, who makes the decisions? What was something that you learned that you didn't know before, informed by this viewpoint?
So one interesting thing that I always say, and I was really struck by this, is that, well, I'm a macroeconomist, so I kind of believe our macroeconomic models, okay, and our macroeconomic relationships. However, in the inside, you actually see that it's mostly political economy which matters. The processes are driven by very different processes than the very difficult macroeconomic processes that we imagine. The processes are driven by many things that we have learned or we have seen actually in the political economy literature. This was quite interesting for me to see. You have different groups, they have different interests. Some of them bring in the one direction, others in the other. The stakeholders, they have clear ideas what needs to happen. And in the end, you have to seek a compromise. It's sometimes difficult for, let's say, technocrat, or let's say somebody who has had academic background, where you always try to find the optimal solution. But the optimal solution from some point to that is, okay, how are we going to increase GDP in 10 years? Is very often not the optimal solution for citizens and for stakeholders, which are sometimes very short-sighted, and they say, well, we want to see the improvement now. And one has to realize why this is important, because if you don't have the communities on your side, if you don't have, for example, the local communities that are going to be affected by some policy on your side, even if it's the best policy, it might not lead to the success that you want it to lead, and it might not result in the results that you have pinned.
Well, thanks, Atanas. We're slowly going into the lessons learned and personal reflections part of the conversation, but I also would like to now encourage the audience to start submitting your questions to Atanas. I'll be going through those questions in just a moment, so just feel free to come and post them in either the chat or the Q&A. But I would like to sort of maybe start with this sort of, we looked at you and your position and the impact you've had. We evaluated that and started to talk about what lens of an economist, what you've learned as an economist per se. That's one theme I'd like to sort of, pick up on, because as academics, we have the liberty to step away from problems, to take the time. Anytime we can choose the problems we want to work on, and you've reflected on the fact that your job is, okay, I have to make this decision now, no matter what, and that's actually what the nature of politics is. Yet you were criticized by making, you say, having a technocratic air or an academic air in this conversation. So maybe one thing that I would like to ask you in this context: do people now view you? What's your standing in Bulgaria? How are you coming away from this experience? Do you come away as a politician, or do people view you as an academic / technocrat? And how do you see your interaction with the political space now continuing going forward?
People indeed see me as a politician, and most of the media sees me as a politician, and I try my best to overcome this view, but it's quite hard. I try my best to explain why we also need the objective thinkers, academic thinkers about issues. We need them, and they're not just experts. They need to have the insight. I'm very happy that I got to have this insight of the political process, of how things are developing, because otherwise, as I said, you're not going to be able to make the right decisions if you're only watching from the outside as an academic. You have very big promises and very big ideas, and not all of them one could be able to implement. So having this knowledge really helps me. However, I continue to see myself more as a technocrat, more as somebody that wants to implement the best policies, however, recognizes the reality and how the reality shapes a policy and decision making.
So on that question, I have a very specific follow-up question on this answer, and that is to sort of think about how much of your actual background and expertise as a macroeconomist did you actually bring to bear in your day-to-day work in development of the plans and the suggestions you've been developing. How much of that actually translated, and how much of other things did you have to learn? What's the proportion here? How much can we expect that to factor in?
I'll be quite fair. I don't say this because we are at the YSI early career days, but it's true. Maybe the biggest impact of me being prepared for the things that I was doing was me being active in communities such as YSI, where we actually discuss real-time problems, real-time issues, relevant problems that we see in the public debate. I don't know if you remember, but when I was visiting YSI some years ago, I was very passionate about this topic, about the future of the euro area, about the European Monetary Union. This was back in 2016. The discussions right today are not much different than back then. And I'm very thankful that I had the opportunity through many different events to discuss this, to think about these issues deep throughout the years, which I have to be honest, prepared me very well for political debates, which are sometimes much more on the surface. So they are not so deep. And it's good to have this background knowledge, because then you know why is there this divergence of views, for example. And I have to be honest, I was very happy to take the position to be in charge in the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, although it was a huge, very difficult problem. It was not easy to solve, exactly because the green transition might affect some regions in some ways that they don't find are good. But the National Recovery and Resilience Plans are the result of the EU in 2020 deciding that as an answer to the pandemic, we will introduce some form of risk sharing between countries. So we'll share the fiscal burden of the crisis. And this comes from long discussions that we had also partly on macroeconomic issue, but mostly on the public policy and political economy issue of how the EU can be stronger together. Does it want to be stronger together, or do we want each country to solve its problems mostly by themselves? So I think on being active, I can only acknowledge on one hand and encourage all young scholars to be active in all fora and all events that also sometimes might not seem quite related to their specific topic of research. This is sometimes dangerous because it diverges your attention to many different things. But I think this is the way to be able to be correctly and rightfully addressing important public debates of the day. And this is what we are trying to do in the end.
Well, great, Atanas. I think there's now a question about us understanding. There's a question from the audience to understand how much these responsibilities weigh on you, especially as a young person. It's very tough for us to understand what kind of responsibilities you were shouldering. So maybe you can talk about what was your day like? What was how long were your days? How did you find balance for yourself? Were you able to sort of, I know when we were roommates in New York, you were making sure that I went out for running as well, because my job with YSI wasn't so easy either. How did you find balance? How did you manage your day? How did you stay healthy yourself? You didn't know how long this job was going to be long, because I think nobody expected it to be 7 months. So maybe you can tell us about how you managed it.
In the public opinion, we often, I think, don't hold enough respect for how actually dynamic and exhausting the work of politicians nowadays is. And I saw it now firsthand. And yes, you're right. At first, I thought, well, I will be in this position now for 3 months. So that means I should give whatever it takes every day, Saturday, Sunday, from early morning till late in the evening. It's a short period. I can basically let all other things stay for a later period. Even for 7 months, I managed to do that, but it was quite exhausting. And I have to say, it's extremely dynamic, especially one has to be tough. One has to be tough in disciplining meetings and having events that are really running on schedule, because it really takes a lot of time. It's media events every day, interviews, which are important. As I said, communicating with citizens is crucial to really improving the environment and improving the policy debate, which is part of actually doing the job right, I think. Then second, there are meetings with different stakeholders, different discussions. Then there are, of course, the decisions to be made. Then there are meetings with the broader public, I would say. So every day is full. At the beginning, I really have to say the first 2 or 3 months were 2 or 3 weeks were quite crazy. It was meetings from early morning till late in the evening, almost without a stop. Of course, this is partly connected to the fact that I have not been living in Bulgaria for the past 10 years, so I really needed to get to know the institutions better, and I really wanted to know, the different, for example, departments that were working for me, then different departments in different ministries, because a number of ministries were answering to me. So this was quite quiet and exhausting period. And one thing that I have to say, sometimes I have criticized politicians before of not being prepared on some topic in a deep way. And I was thinking, why didn't you read this in more detail? But there is simply no time. The day is so full of responsibilities that you simply don't have time to get deeper in the topics. Your experts are preparing you, but sometimes they have 10 minutes to tell you everything about it. And that is why I was so actually, I was very lucky that I was in charge of topics that I've been following myself for recent years, which really helped me get along the way.
So a theme of the previous session, I'm not sure if you had time to listen, I doubt it, but it was sort of the fact that we are trained as specialists. And a lot of, in the academy, you're a specialist on a very narrow topic. Very rarely do we get incentivized to sort of be transdisciplinary or broad on big topics. But of course, as a politician, that's exactly what you need to be doing. So maybe just can you speak on what's the secret sauce? What do you think, in your conclusion, what makes for a good and strong politician? I think you've already said a couple things like strong communication and so forth, but there's intangibles, having political backers. How did you build that up so quickly? Because you were an outsider, and where do you stand now with your insights on that?
Yeah, this is a really good question. This is something that I saw. I have always had this split in my mind, because as you are right, saying today in academia and being an expert means really getting into one topic very deep and being like really, really well prepared for it. Whereas politicians need to be generalists in a way. And I have always tried to diverge from this being only focused on one topic, which has not affected very well my publication list because you get distracted by different themes and questions, but has helped me now in this position. Yet, as you say, you are really, it is impossible that you can cover all the questions. For example, I was in charge of also deciding the future of some infrastructure projects in the transport sector, something that I haven't been working on or something that I was not so deeply involved with before. But then you have to find experts that you trust. You have to see how the institutions see things. You might disagree with the institutions. For example, you might disagree with the Ministry of Transport, which says, well, this is how we want to reform our railways. You might have other ideas. And it's a very fine balance. You have to listen to them, but you also have to listen to what your experts are saying and what your opinion is. And you have to find the right balance. And this is something that is challenging because one is sometimes unhappy with this compromise that one has to do. But from what I have seen, this is the only way actually to go forward.
That's interesting. So my personal conclusion is also the fact that we as academics have chosen to be specialists only. It's not just, I'm not just talking about economists. I think this also might be a deeper structural problem that I'm suspecting, I'm only speculating, we're putting more onus onto the political space to somehow fix this generalizing of knowledge, just generalizing of consensus, and the fact that we have a media that's much faster and also more divided, more divisive. How much space that actually gives us to actually build consensus, and at the same time, we accuse politicians of having backdoor relationships and deals when that is really the compromise, the space that is available to basically create these spaces. So I'm really curious if you could relate to that point in any way. Like, is your view of politicians now shifted from being inherently negative in the public view to something that's actually maybe different in your view now after you've served in that position yourself?
It is very volatile from day to day. I change my opinion on this very often. I think it's true that politicians need to have some red lines on which they should not abandon. Because in the end, if they are elected as representatives of some part of the political spectrum and as some part of the electorate, they really have to hold true to some main aspects that they have promised or that they see as crucial or central. So them going back on these red lines, I think is very bad. And this erodes public trust in politics, not in policy, in politics. And it erodes the way that citizens see the whole process. However, as you said, yes, on the inside, you see that, well, sometimes you have to find a solution. You have to find a solution, and sometimes you cannot only say, well, it's going to be my way, because this is not how it works. In the end, it's a democratically led system, and you have to find a way that everybody that has some representation has their priorities also addressed in one way or another.
These are important insights. So as we come to a conclusion to this conversation, I would just like to give you a chance to sort of reflect on the institutional process a little bit, because YSI, I think, is a very particular, like you said, you mentioned, referenced many times YSI in this conversation, and the intangibles that YSI offers in this kind of position that you came into. So I'm very curious to sort of see how, besides the things you mentioned, the fact that you've learned how to work with people, the power of networks, the power of engaging with questions and having multiple avenues to actually tackle institutionally, not just from an academic perspective, but YSI also offers, for example, a way for you to be a student in an institution and then also operate outside of it a little bit. And I think these are sort of insights that sort of become natural to you once you know how to get around certain institutional constraints and know how to operate on many different levels. I'm just wondering if you could reflect on this institutional response that YSI offers to economics and the opening that we provide, because you're also, in some sense, trying to provide openings to the policy space of Bulgaria and try to connect Bulgaria up to other spaces. I'm just trying to see if you can draw analogies in that way as well?
From what so I don't know, but what I think is that, let's say some decades ago, or even maybe 20 years ago, the whole public policy process was not so transparent. With the internationalization of academia, of events, and especially in the last 10 years, and the opening of events, this has made the process more transparent. And this leaves it to the situation in which now young people, which are still, for example, in their bachelor studies or master studies or pre-doc, can get involved in the public policy process. They can learn how this goes. They can get prepared, which means that as soon as they are then working professionally in one area or another, they can get already very, very active because they have had exposure. And this is important. This is important because, for example, super important thing is to get to increase the participation of young people in the political process on one hand, but also in the public policy process. Because in the end, we want a fair distribution of decision making also through the age distribution, so to say. We want more young people to be aware of the problems, to be taking decisions that they think are right, because their participation is, for example, in elections, sometimes very low. And this is quite concerning because a lot of the decisions that are being taken for the long term are decisions that are mostly going to affect their life in the long term. So for me, this is very crucial that with more transparency, with more active participation, especially from the non-governmental sector, from academic sector, from organizations like YSI, we increase the participation of people, and therefore we make them more prepared for the time that they're going to be in charge of things and they're going to decide in one way or another.
Well, Atanas, you're still only 30 years old, so we're going to be watching you and benefiting from your work going forward. So for now, we just wish you best of luck in finishing your PhD as a next step. And we're going to follow your work and your activities going forward really closely. Before we close, so Atanas, what are some final thoughts that you'd like to share in terms of general reflections or things that we haven't covered yet?
I think mostly I would like to share the fact that I'm quite happy of the things that happened. They were extremely challenging at times. They leave you in doubt because you're not sure whether the decisions that are going to be taken are the best ones, in the sense that there is always uncertainty. What will happen in the long term? Will these reforms get implemented? Or maybe they will get reversed? Did we need more backing for them? Did we do enough in terms of persuading the people that this is something good? So there is always doubt, but most of all, one is encouraged that one is contributing to, in this case, public debate and better decision making, better governance. And I think this is what can drive you further. It gives you strength even in this, as I said, there were days when there were meetings for 10 hours from the early morning until late in the evening, and you're exhausted. You're not sure whether you know that this is the optimal way, because as I said, there are different stakeholders that have different views, and you're trying to strike some balance between them and your own opinion. But the fact that you know that in a way you're improving the situation, especially by using the skills or chances that you have already had to improve things, I think is what gives you more focus and what keeps you going.
Well, everybody, that was Atanas Pekanov, the former Deputy Prime Minister of Bulgaria and YSI member, and really glad to have you for this conversation. Before we close, I would like to just advertise the next session in about 35 minutes, organized by our partners at IAFE, on how to build a feminist career in the academy, which will feature Lynn Osome, Ama Espino, Caroline Shinaz Hussein. And I really would like to encourage all of us to also participate in that conversation, to continue on our early career days, to think about the structural barriers that we face in building our own careers and be new academic thinkers at the same time. Atanas, thanks again for walking us through the tensions that you've experienced, all these insights. It's so much to digest. I think this might be only a first. And in David Collander's parlance, we might need a scotch or two to better get at the issues going forward. But for now, thank you so much for joining us, and really looking forward to seeing you in person soon.
Thank you so much, Jay. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.